industry and how we've evolved as a business collectively to sort of what is the future, right? And we'll do a little future telling as well. So I'm going to start and just throw this out and try to stay out of the way, because I'm as much here to learn as anybody is. Marcie, why don't you, we talked a little bit about this a few hours ago. Talk to us a little bit about how the entertainment business has evolved and how, as you described it, there were these quote moments that sort of are memorable, that sort of set the stage for where we are today.
Well, they were probably memorable because I was in the middle of trying to sell it, so I wanted it to work. So, you know, we had the conversation that, you know, throughout my career, so I've been in post-production and content creation and facility management for the last 23 years, and mainly post-production. But what was really interesting to me during that time is there were these moments within content creation where it really changed the workflows and the look of the way a studio worked or the way a facility worked or a creator worked. And at those moments, what you always tried to do, especially for the creators, was to not make it about the technology, because the minute you made it about the technology, a creator would freak out and they'd be like, oh my God, I can't do this. But you were always trying to get to the next level in the best way that people could see content. So like for an example, I would say standard definition to high definition was a moment where every studio and every facility had to learn how to work in high definition, not the same type of equipment, not the same way to create content. Or maybe when it was scanning film and then the creation of putting together film in a digital manner, or transition from 35 millimeter to digital cameras, or potentially when 3D came out and everybody really thought that, you know, Avatar was really all about the 3D, but it was really about the conversion of digital projectors all over the world for a day and date release of a film. And so at every moment in history of at least my career for the last 23 years, it has really been about these moments, these start states that I like to call, where everybody in the industry is learning at a certain time. And you don't feel stupid because you're all learning at the same time. So you can fail and you can get up and you can fix and you can readjust. And that's kind of where we've been at for like the last 5 years, I would say, in immersive. Where you now look at the intersection of gaming and storytelling in a workflow manner of how do you move game engine in line with the creation of content for interactive. And so, you know, I think that that's where we are at this moment. We spent a fair amount of time at Technicolor trying to see if you could take high-end assets and move them into a game engine. That doesn't work. So then we started building tools to try to change the industry, the content creation industry of the studios, to then start moving game engine and asset creation earlier into the workflow and infusing tools like VR and AR in order to build these large films.
Yeah, I think that obviously captures, you know, a couple decades, if not 4 at this point in terms of how we've been talking about this. Ted, let's bring it real modern day. Let's talk a little bit about a brand everybody knows if they have kids under the age of 16, I guess. Talk to me a little bit about Fortnite's success and how it hit the market and why it was so magical and why every kid I know is got their, you know, seat at the table.
I wish I had something to do with Fortnite so I could.
I figured it's just an opinion. You might have an opinion on this.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's I'd love to be a part of Fortnite.
Wouldn't we all?
Wouldn't we all?
We'd all be retired if we weren't.
We would all be retired and not be up here.
Yes.
But I think it's one of those events that is game-changing that we have to listen to. What is it that made it so addictive? Why is it the phenomenon for kids now? And I think they were so smart when they made it that they realized as they were designing it, what story would suck you in and keep you in, what could be shared. Very different than what we've done traditionally on movies, where you kind of spoon feed an experience and it's very directed about what that experience is, whereas Fortnite has taken on a life of its own, I think, and we all have to learn from that, that is, for this generation, being both consumer and co-author and participant, which maybe everyone here knows from the gaming industry is what it is, but in cinema, it's been much more a passive experience. So that's what I take away from it.
And talk a little bit about, your experience with the filmmaking community, sort of playing off of what Marcie said earlier, of how they've attempted numerous times to bring these big theatrical productions to VR AR. Let's just, we just finished the NBA story, so I'm curious to see how does it compare to the studio business?
I think I felt very lucky that I rode the VR wave at Fox, starting with The Wild we did with Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern, where it was really a science project of going, God, let's be on the trail with them, to Martian and Alien, and we were looking for experiences that would complement the movies we were making, but also would lend themselves to what the medium and the storytelling would be. So we were always looking for story first, and I think we did it for a while, but then we also hit the limitations of what we could come up with. And I think what's great about it is that everything that's happened since then has taken it, the stories have advanced beyond where we were a little bit limited. And that, I think that's the rest of the panel that knows what works and what doesn't. And we were really out there in the dark experimenting and trying to learn.
So Yelena, that sort of brings us to the earlier conversation we had about human design, as opposed to just taking an intellectual property and forcing it into this VR AR world. Talk to us a little bit about the journey Oculus has had from early days Gear VR to Rift to now Quest and Vader Immortal, and bring us into that thought around people being active or interactive in environments as opposed to watching.
Sure, yeah. And I think to Ted's point on studios, just to kind of end that, making content, what we found initially was that the people that were making content were the marketing department, so it was always a little bit after the fact. And to an example that we just put out now with Vader Immortal is an actually extension of the Star Wars story, so something fans can dig into. The marketing stuff was never deep enough for audiences to really come with, and I think now we're getting deeper and people that are more serious about it. But the challenge was, without being financially sustainable, why would the actual studio invest in that part? So I came from maybe 14 years ago. I started in documentaries, and I really saw the power that movies had to really change people. But I was really excited about how technology, and I was seeing people experiment with interactive storytelling on the web and hacking Kinect sensors to projection mapping, of how you incorporate the body, how you incorporate agency into narrative to really make them feel like an active participant. And when I started at Oculus, I started at Oculus Story Studio. And Oculus Story Studio was started really with the question of, can you tell a story in VR? Because that wasn't really, there wasn't an answer for that necessarily. But we knew that you can create games in VR. The idea of how the gaming industry has been creating, they've been creating a 3D all along. It's just been on a flat screen, but they have been creating real worlds. And so when we came in through their Story Studio, and then afterwards I was on the experiences team where we were funding external creators of making stuff, we still kind of came in with a little bit of that division of gaming and film first perspective. And we worked with a lot of VFX studios, and I think we learned the hard way over time was just very much that difference in how you approach creation within VR. VR is the ultimate human-centered design machine, right? It's made for the human. You're actually in this world. But I think to Marcie's point, and I think to Ted's point, a lot of filmmakers and VFX are really used to just full control, and then we created this experience, it's fully finished, here, experience it. Versus from a gaming perspective of the agency comes first. And this place I'm really excited about getting to is that perfect blend in between where it's not quite a game, and because I really think of, and I'm sure there's a lot of debate over what's a game, what's not a game, we talk about it internally all the time, but the way I define it for myself is games in a sense are strategically led. There's generally a win state, there's progression blockers that you're getting through. And the way I like to approach interactive stories is really thinking about how are you led through emotion, how are you led through curiosity, but still thinking about the human first. And so I think the first thing we came out with was Gear VR before Oculus Rift came out, and initially people thought, oh, everyone has a cell phone, VR is ubiquitous, but really people didn't really love kind of putting a phone in front of your head and it drained your battery, and there were challenges with that, but also it wasn't fully embodied. Rift is really, really incredible, but you also need to connect it to a PC, which is mostly a gaming community. But now we're at the space where we just launched Oculus Quest, was that just a week ago? Yeah, it feels like so much longer. How many of you guys have heard of Quest or seen Quest? Oh, great. Yay.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
And
That's good.
And the community is embracing it. And so just that part of actually being immersed and being able to interact and not being tethered is really kind of, I feel like we're just at that beginning again, because we're finally giving people what they want. And coming back to creation a little bit, we are starting to learn of the different way of approaching interactive content, where it's not, I think within VFX and film, you have these processes that you start with kind of the framework, and you build until you get to polish, and the interaction was really thought of as kind of like the add-on after everything's really pretty. And people go in and they're like, wow, this is really beautiful graphics, because this is what the company's known for. But the actual interaction isn't inherently implemented into the experience. Versus now, within interactive storytelling, it's initially prototyping what is that interaction and how does it feel and what's it ultimately going to look like. And that's your foundation and bare bones to build from. And through that, we're starting to create much more beautiful, intuitive projects that are really starting to work. We still have a lot to figure out, I think. It's just been like 4 years, and I feel like we've done a lot since then. But we are in the process of starting to really create these magical experiences that are like right at that blend of the two.
Awesome. Jennifer, Kite and lightning is counter to some of these larger entities here, is the smallest on the panel.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what advantages and disadvantages you have when you think about this wild world of AR and VR and storytelling. Is there a perspective that's different or similar to, because you've got a small handful of people?
I think that when you come into this space, there's a lot of really talented indie developers, and I think that we look at it, our value system and how we look at things as we're developing and as we're coming in, and we don't have big budgets. And things are constantly changing and constantly evolving. I am so lucky to have the two co-founders that I do, Corey and Akrima, who are creative and inventive, and every time a new tool comes out, anything that comes into the market, we work in the Unreal Engine, and just they take it, they grab it, they figure out creative ways to combine things and use these tools and share with the community on top of it, so that everybody can benefit together. And we're able to do things that I think years ago, when I was doing VFX episodic work and working in traditional pipelines, that we would never have been able to do in the past with real-time rendering and character creation. And we're able to actually take all of these wonderful things, and I encourage so many indie teams, don't get discouraged because you don't have a big budget. You now have tools in the world that we never had for so many years. And if you take these tools and you get the right combo of people and you look at it as, wow, we are pioneering, we're embarking on this journey, don't be afraid, get creative. It is a wonderful time, but you do have to have that mentality going into this. And we were always in the reality of, we weren't going to see mass saturation this year, last year, or whatever everybody else predicted. We always decided as a team to stay lean, get the right people, have the right thinkers, and just kind of ride that wave until there was mass saturation. But with that being said, there are so many things these days when we're talking to a different audience, and it's who are you building for as well? Who are we talking to? Are we talking to a generation 10 years from now, which is natively grabs an Oculus and the hand controllers and will go to town for hours? So there's a lot of things that we have to think about as developers, and I think that we just need to be patient, we need to be educated, we need to continue educating ourselves, and you need to, as a team, keep each other motivated and share and really advance the community as a whole, and really share the tools that we're learning, because the better the content gets together collectively, the faster this industry is going to grow. And we have a responsibility as a development team, even with small people, to create quality experiences that people have a very easy access, ready to go. I step into your experience, I'm not fumbling around, your user experience is tied up. I mean, everything is just very streamlined, and I encourage everybody, you know, we kind of have to walk before we run. So sometimes we get too excited because we have this technology and we think that's going to take the place of a good story, or take the place of, you know, just some random technology we're showing off amongst ourselves. But who are we doing this for? And we have to remember that, and we have to remember that most people have never touched a VR or immersive experience, and except gamers, yes, they're interactive, but still we're going for full immersion in our studio. So we really have to be careful when they come in, they're trusting us, and we need to make sure that we're testing and we're taking the time to introduce people on a level that they come out winning, and that they feel good, and that they come back for more. And that's really kind of our value system. So as a studio, is it a tall order, and are we small? Yes. But luckily, I am so grateful every day to walk into work and have some of the most talented people I've ever worked with in my life working with me every day.
It's a great time to be a creator.
Yeah.
And I think the benefit of you being small and the nimbleness and is fantastic, because the tools are accessible to you and they get better every year. The devices are getting better every year. So I think watching this from a big studio perspective, with all the things that kind of make a studio go slow, I envy your smallness and just what we learned was, boy, the simple stories that you immediately go into seem to grab onto you faster. So
Yeah, definitely. And
I want to be you.
we want to be you.
And one of the
There's a happy medium there.
one of the most successful experiences out there is made by a 3-person team in the Czech Republic,
Yeah.
Beat Saber.
Yeah.
And that is sweeping VR more than those
Yes.
$20 million games that people are making, which is incredible. And I'm working with a great team. Tender Claws on a really fun project, and their project that was launched before virtual reality is a big top-selling game too, and they have very few people on that team. So it does take a big team to create like the highest form of polish. But if you've got, and I love this perspective of really making sure and thinking about your user and your player or your participant, however, your audience, however you want to call it. I don't think we've agreed upon term yet, but really think about them having the greatest experience possible, going back to that human-centered design approach. And you can create something incredibly magical and fantastic.
Marcie, do you want to talk a little bit about the tools? Because I think you mentioned the Technicolors in that business. Without getting too wonky here, where is the biggest advances have been in the tools? Is it rendering? Is it, the game machines?
So what I would say is, Technicolor was like one of the, largest content creation company in the world as a work for hire. And so we work in the advertising and marketing industry with our brand, The Mill. For MPC, they work on all of the big visual effects films like Jungle Book and Lion King. And then you've got Animation and Games, which is 2,000 artists and engineers sitting in India working on AAA games. So when you look at Technicolor as a whole, they're working on many different projects, many different parts of the industry. Why it was interesting for Technicolor to get into VR is, the president of the company really felt like what was going to push VR forward was high-end image, repeatability, getting a person back in a headset. How do you create reality in virtual reality, essentially? So using all those teams, we pulled from those teams and created what the Technicolor Experience Center was. And what I found was really interesting, more so than I think any other visual effects company or any other facility company was I took people who were 19 and 20 years old, and I placed them in line as our lead developers. I brought one guy who was a AAA game designer who had worked on big titles, but he was more on the look dev side of it. And then I took India and I created that pipeline where we created a fully immersive pipeline. So think about a total of 30 people. And my biggest thing was, I just wanted to figure out how to make this content. Like, how could I make a repeatable, scalable way to make this content where it's not costing millions and millions and millions of dollars, and every time I would tell someone how much it would cost, they'd go, what? We don't have that kind of money. So my whole thing first was to just kind of set the table and see what was out there and see how we could build it. And then the creation of content was really interesting because you then would go find the tools. So then we would go find partners. Okay, what is that partner doing? Very early on, how I got introduced to Kite and Lightning is they created the first 360 render out of, as a plugin, out of Unreal. And so all of a sudden, that was really cool because you could take a 360 that was from a game engine and now you have a 360 render. So it was really about marrying all these people who were doing all of these cool things within the world of immersive. And trying to fuse together this game mentality with this traditional artist mentality and blend the two to find the perfect unicorn. And then what we also did is had an artist in residency program where we brought many different traditional, either creative directors. We had Lynette Walworth, who was an installation artist. But the whole idea was really, joke was on them. We were making their content for them for free, but ultimately they were teaching our people how to actually build this content. And so that's what I think over the last 2 years, what was really interesting. When you take a 19-year-old kid who was a gamer his entire, for the last 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden you put him on a lead developer role, talking about, the first female shaman in the Amazon. What is he going to bring to the table? So what was really interesting about that is you had light field interaction, you had walkthrough experience, you had 360 content going into a game engine sphere, and then, oh my gosh, you actually had a story in it. So while I'm not talking about the tools, which was your original question, I honestly believe, and this is kind of cliche, I really think it's about the people that are sitting behind the machines that are going to give you the tools. There's not a magic button here that's going to create the best game, the best experience, the best, the best anything. It's really about fusing these minds together to see what's working and what's not working.
Makes sense. It's people driven, right?
Yeah, it needs to be.
It has to be.
So a couple of us have mentioned people far away from here. So in the Hollywood Reporter's world, let alone Billboard's world, we're constantly reminded by how global this world is and how regardless of borders, we're engaging and connecting. My sense is that that's also very true in this world, the virtual world. Tell me if any of you have ideas, sort of an open question, where some of the most interesting experiences are coming from globally. What territories, are there dialects? Are there places where people have really engaged and sort of grabbed hold of the medium and are sort of leading, above and beyond, let's call it, small studios and big studios?
Yelena, I think that's you.
Yeah.
Facebook's global, right?
Well, no, the thing that comes to mind is, I think gaming's its kind of own thing. Like gaming has a business model, it's specific, it's not yet 100% easily sustainable for a lot of gaming studios, but I'm talking about kind of the intersection between film and game, more of that interactive storytelling. I'm actually seeing a lot of really incredible stuff coming out of France. And part of it is, I feel like, in Canada too, so Canada and France have a lot of public funding just towards raw innovation and pushing forward of the arts for the purpose of culture, which is pretty awesome. So people can make stuff just for the raw experimentation of pushing the medium forward without, I think when we initially started, we talked a lot about mainstream, and that word is so dangerous because oftentimes people think mainstream is just as broad as possible and as dumbed down as possible, but that's not what makes something with a lot of staying power. Something with a lot of staying power has like a heart and a soul to it, and something people connect with. So an early experience that came out, Notes on Blindness, which I still really, really love, came out of a team in France, and they just had it had a very strong intention to it and a very strong art style, and people deeply connected with it and still talk about it as a story and as something that really sticks with them. And we've worked with them in the past. But we're seeing really incredible things from all pockets of places, and it's kind of my favorite thing to discover that and to discover who has that unique idea that pushes things forward in a little bit of a different way, and someone else can like grow on top of that, and someone else can grow on top of that. So in short, everywhere. I mean, even in the Bay Area, we're working on a project that I really love called Wolves on the Walls that I think does a lot of really, really smart things with interactive storytelling. They worked with an immersive theater team in New York, which is a great, great place to get educated about intuitive interactions, because they've been guiding physical bodies and spaces for a long time now. So if you're in New York, go check out Sleep No More and Then She Fell, which is one of my favorites. So Wolves on the Walls worked with Third Rail, and the project is one of my favorites. I also still love the work that Felix and Paul are doing. We had a project recently called Traveling While Black, which premiered at Sundance. And what's interesting with that is I thought everyone was already over 360 videos, everyone's interactive. But because they made it so high quality with such a touching story to it, with light interactivity, people resonated with it so strongly. And it also just showed that people love story, people know story, people are familiar with story. So don't discount that sense of familiarity. But I also really, really love this project I'm working on right now that's coming out on Quest pretty soon, called The Under Presents, where we're calling it Journey Meets Sleep No More. And we're actually incorporating live actors who are going to be using quests from a different location, and they're going to puppet characters that are going to be able to give you cool one-on-one experiences as part of the larger narrative. And so this is kind of an example. If Traveling While Black is more traditional, as we can say in VR, Under Presents is really kind of pushing innovation forward, and I think both those steps are really important. And I also love all the stuff that the location-based places are creating, because they can do a lot more, because with Oculus, our goal is very much consumer-driven, and so that's Quest. It's the easiest things possible, it's the lightest thing possible. But when you don't have those restrictions and you have something that's location-based, like The Void or Dreamscape Immersive, then you can actually touch like objects that are mapped to your virtual world, but you can actually touch them because they're physical and really have these fully embodied experiences. So I think all these kind of pushes in all these different corners of the world are just kind of raising us all together inch by inch as we're moving forward.
Ted, do you have anything that's on the horizon that you can talk about publicly at the Fox Disney family of properties?
I don't actually. We're now part of the Walt Disney Corporation, so I'm a cast member. And
Where are your ears?
Yeah, where are my ears? So no, I know that out of ILM and that division that they've been doing a lot of great material for Star Wars, and we took it as far as we could within 20th Century Fox, but I think they probably learned from watching us meander around. And now to what Yelena was saying about, not just being marketing pieces, they really are looking at extensions of story. And I wish I could get involved in it as a ex, big fan of Lucasfilm and everything, but I'm not. So I'm sure they're working on some really cool stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about.
You're probably working on cool stuff, you just can't talk about it. Jennifer, are there things that are on the horizon that you can talk about?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. We've been, for the past couple years, working on an original gaming IP called Babylon Battle Royale. And just to give you a little backstory about this wacky world that we're creating, and just so everybody kind of understands what the studio is known for, in case you're not familiar, we're always known for creating emotionally transformative experiences in VR that evoke a lot of emotion within the consumer, and also that blend story, narrative, and gaming. So that's kind of our general foundation. And so Babylon is a world that takes place in the future. We as humans have discovered how to achieve immortality by taking a pill. We get frozen in the bodies that we are all in right now, and nobody thought about the consequences of the toddlers and the babies, so they get stuck in their baby bodies for eternity. And then they get tired of living amongst us tall people and being made fun of, and they form their own extravagant Vegas-style world called Babylon that they all habitate in, where they fight for world domination, riches, and fame and fortune. And it's a no holds bar and everything wild and crazy, and it's just a lot of fun. And to be honest with you, we are having a blast making it because we are not only able to really dive in with the new tools on some of this character creation and seeing them come to life in real time and seeing how far we can push this, but on top of it, creating really rich environments for people to dive into if you are going to be in VR. We're also playing around right now. We're scheduled to launch later this year. But we're playing around with launching not only in VR, but also on a 2D desktop PC version, so that people, if you don't have a headset yet, you might still be able to play in some of the environments against somebody with a VR headset. And we hope that that introduces people to the IP and also allows them to get kind of emotionally invested in this creative world. And our hope is that they have so much fun with all of this wackiness and craziness that they actually will invest in a headset, and then eventually we can move it into not just a combat style arena game, but moving more into open world and expansion of this very extravagant, crazy place that Corey, our creative director, has dreamed up. So it's a lot of fun. So that's kind of what we're currently working on right now.
As creators and sort of storytellers with this lens, how do you guys, either as companies or as individuals, how do you keep up with the rate of change, right? And or at the same time, I heard we have to be patient. So is there something that you sort of, do you take a magic pill and decide that you're going to stay where you are right now until the technology comes around, or are you chasing it? Is it chasing you? How do you think about the speed of change in this industry relative to what you're doing day to day?
I'll start. So pivoting is really important. It's really looking at what's interesting today and how do you stay relevant within the space, because you don't want it to pass you by, obviously. But when I look at the world as a whole right now, and I look at where we are in this moment in time, Quest being a really big deal, but I also look at the location-based side, not just VR location-based, Void, Nomadic, Dreamscape. I look at things like Meow Wolf and the successes of Meow Wolf, and then an Area 15 that are now building large immersive places with large 3D interactive walls and different ways to tell stories, and then potentially bringing in VR and AR into these places. Because I think where we're at is, and I think you touched on it, Jennifer, we're 99% of the world does not know what we're even talking about. and I think that that's really important for everybody to understand. So it's about socializing them in ways where it's fun and it's engaging and it's people can get their aha moment. I talk about that a lot. When was your aha moment? I know when mine was, but how do you give that to people? How do you make them feel like, yeah, now I get it? And I think that those are the things that I like to do. At the center itself, it's about curation of content. I curate all kinds of content, not even content that Technicolor may have built. It could be, Wolf in the Walls, just because I think it's an amazing piece. But I think that you have to stay relevant by understanding what all of these places are doing and how they're getting there, and constantly explaining to your. I have a president and a CEO who thinks I'm nuts. It's not going fast enough. What are you, nuts? This is not really happening. So it's constantly trying to find the pivot and finding those really good moments. Like right now, I'm going to say this because I can. Messaging for immersive technology should be always positive. And what frustrates me is when people haven't gotten it right, or when things have gone wrong, or when it didn't come out the way that it should have come out, rather than knocking that developer or knocking that company who really tried to make something, is not going to help grow this business. What will grow the business is when people are talking positively about something in a way where everyone has a piece of it. And so I think that that's the other thing that's really important, is positive messaging. So I'm thrilled to hear that Quest is doing so well.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to the technology, we're kind of the ones building the technology. So, so I'm lucky enough to kind of be on that track and see it happen as it develops. But with that said, I think a big part is being okay with kind of letting go of your ideas or your obsessions, and just being aware of reality is I think is really huge, because I know my personal passion is the constant push of innovation and discovery, and I love that, and I've been doing that for the past decade or so, and that's where I get really excited. But also being fully aware of, we're actually building this for audiences, and what do audiences actually want? And I do think there's a difference between the content we kind of create for our own bubble, where it can be highly experimental and we can constantly push things and it doesn't have to have a certain amount of polish, to audiences that aren't part of our bubble and our general audiences who, when they buy something, they do expect a certain amount of polish. And they might not be familiar, so what is that entry point of familiarity for audiences, and how do we get that, and how do we think smartly about that, so that once they get in the space, then they can be introduced the thing that I'm actually really passionate about is the fully innovative, is the fully interactive, because with gamers know how to play gaming, and that threshold between getting into from rectilinear games to VR wasn't an easy one, but it was known in his audience who understands it. This space that we're creating, which is kind of right in between which is interactive storytelling, there's not an audience that's familiar with it, along with creators who are figuring it out. And I think that's really, really important to remember, is that what can you do to give your audience an introduction to feel comfortable, so then they can go and explore, because VR for a lot of people is very foreign. So if there's something that's already foreign, what can in a sense feel familiar? So I like that perspective that you guys are taking over at Kite and Light. Did we decide lightning or lightning?
Lightning.
Lightning.
Like a lightning bolt.
Thunder
Great.
and lightning.
I thought so, and I hoped so. Sounds more fun that way. Of really, really thinking about that best experience possible. And so I think that for me is sometimes tough, because I just want to constantly experiment. But no one's going to be successful if there's not an audience. So we have to constantly think about that if we want to be sustainable and if we want to grow the space.
One thing too, I just want to add to that too, is just like the physicality. People are very excited about getting in an experience and being able to have full range of motion and express themselves with their hands. And as we get better with the tracking and the Quest, obviously, with the sensors everything getting better. I mean, for us, it's just a dream come true, because you're untying our hands as developers, and we're so grateful because now we can go into these worlds, and we were kind of chatting about this earlier, but definitely it's kind of like we're dropping people off in a world and you're expected to operate, and we come in here and I have 360 degrees to play with, and yet my hands are tied. So it's kind of like also too, I always think about, and sometimes I juggle this back and forth in my mind, there's like a passive kind of experience, and then there's the interactive experience, right? And you have two parties here. There are some people that are going to enjoy being in a cinematic experience where they lay back and they relax, and there's nature experiences that I just go in and I kick back. But then there's other things where the expectation is definitely, I want to move, I want to grab, I want to be able to touch things, and so you have to really think about your content and what does it play best at. But luckily for us, like I said, I mean, that the hardware is getting better. We're not tethered. You have full range of motion, the physicality. I mean, with esports and Echo Arena and people actually physically competing, and the health benefits to some of these experiences. I mean, all these things are just amazing. So yeah, I mean, definitely, I think that kind of as the technology is going, just constantly looking at it as just how it just consistently benefits us, even though we do have to keep up.
Ted, anything on the keeping up?
Yeah, I think knowing your audience, being untethered, being active in it, and being simple, learning from gaming as opposed to passive watching a film. Filmmakers should really pay it to who want to play in this space, should do their homework there. I think all the ground has been laid in terms of, oh my God, we've got these scuba masks on our head and it's so hard to teach people. I think we're past all the hard stuff. What Marcie says about being positive, because it is such a great time to be a creator with these new tools coming, and things are going to get even more comfortable, better resolution, everything. So it's really what all you guys are saying. It's exciting.
Yeah, and it is like, even with Quest kind of starting, I'm seeing getting to more mainstream, it becomes even more important to think about making stuff that's accessible, and thinking about, I think we're all kind of on the same page, really thinking about your audience. Yeah.
Are there properties or things out there that you think categorically are not good for AR, VR type experiences, or do you think it's pervasive?
I think that I've seen some experiences that are probably should never be put in VR. And I think that's the other thing you have to think about is, people are going to be putting this on their head and they're going to have a total visceral feeling to anything. And I heard I went to one experience where, it was a guy getting, the shit kicked out of him in the head, and you were a passive watcher of this. And that I don't think is a good idea. Like, why would you do that? Like, I understand the whole empathy side of it, but when you have graphic stuff like that, that's not really pushing something forward. Maybe in training that might be interesting, but if you're going to go to mass audiences, I would be careful to get too graphic. I hear porn is doing really well in VR, but I don't know because I've never seen it.
You hear from a friend.
Why is everybody looking at me? I didn't say anything.
I thought you were going to say something.
I'm not going to say anything.
He's not going to touch porn. He's going to say, what are you looking at? He works for Walt Disney Corporation.
Yeah, I work for Disney now.
Now
Oh
you
my
do.
God.
It's been 2 weeks.
Oh, all right, 2 weeks. Okay, I've seen a lot of porn. Porn's great in here.
Ted, are there things at the studios that, you had very, very active
Thanks, Marcie.
creatives at the studios and all the way to the top? Are there things that they're like convinced are great ideas for AR and VR and you're like, maybe not so much? I mean, you don't have to name names or properties, but are there just things that belong in a big theater theatrically and are non-personal?
Look, I think the marketing tie-in was really overdone on everything. I just think you've got to look at your audience each time and make an experience that is something that they can participate in, as opposed to something you think would be, cool and a cool tie-in to something. I don't think it's any more complicated than that.
I think you have to understand that the marketing tie-in came in a way where that was the only part of the studio that was going to fund this stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
And so because that was the only way that people could actually get funding to create these experiences, it got a lot of studios through a really tough time. And, I just wish that there was a way to scale this so that people felt like that they could invest in something and get it seen to large amounts of people, because that's our biggest problem, right? So if people aren't seeing it, where are they going to buy it? They're not going to buy it. If they're not seeing good high-end content, it's just this catch-22. Why am I going to invest in it? A lot of times I'll go to a studio, I'm like, hey, you know what, I think it'd be really cool if you did this property in VR, and they're like, yeah, how many eyeballs am I going to get? How do I make my money back? What's the ROI? And that's why I think right now, large scale places where there's lots of people and you can hand them a quest and say, hey, go play Beat Saber. I mean, get it, understand it. Or, you know, that's what we need. We're still in the education
I
world.
was going to say, it sounds very still early days. I was fortunate to be on the internet in 1994 in bringing television and even magazines into the web. And there were so many people trying to get at it from so many different ways. And it was a very fun time because it was very community oriented. We all knew each other. There was 20 or 30 of us trying to make something of 100 years of gourmet magazines, and we created a thing called Epicurious. And so, but it was very community oriented, and we were all trying to move the ball forward. I'm getting the sense that we're still in that moment here of getting from that last moment to this next moment. We still are a community of creators and technologists who want to move the ball forward. Is that somewhat accurate, or are you guys competing for eyeballs? You know, as they like to say in the media business.
All 10 million of them.
Yeah.
I think what's been great about it is the community,
Yeah.
that people learn from each other's mistakes, and there has been more cooperation than competition. The visual effects business is very competitive within movies because they're bidding on the jobs, and the technology's been kind of the same. But with VR and VR creations, I do feel like that's when the magic of it, that's when what's been fun about it is helping each other. Because it was so new, it was so exciting to everybody that has been in it.
I don't think anyone, I don't think anyone's competing against each other in VR right now. I think if one person wins, everyone wins. So everyone wants everyone to win.
Yeah, no one's making any money.
Not yet.
The knives aren't out
Some
yet.
people are, but yeah, it's
We're
not.
good.
It's definitely not sustainable for especially short experience. And something I think about a lot is, and again, games are kind of its own thing. But if we're creating new content formats, there isn't necessarily a sustainable monetization system that audiences have felt comfortable with. Like a lot of these VR experiences that aren't games are short. They're like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, can be up to 40 minutes, but that definitely gets expensive. And if you think about a correlation to that in film, who pays for short films? You expect all of that stuff to be free. So audiences, in a sense, have been trained to consume a lot of free content. But with gaming, you pay per kind of usually hour of gameplay, but it's based on how long of content there is. You feel like that's how you get your money's worth. And so it's really hard in this space. And one thing that's amazing about VR is that it's this convergence space that we talked about, is that you have industries from gaming, industries from software, industries from film, industries from hardware, all coming together, figuring out how to speak the same language, get all their learnings from their places and figuring out how to merge it, but also thinking about audience behaviors of being introduced to that and figuring out, do I pay for this, or is this supposed to be free? Like not having a sense of how much things should be worth. And oftentimes, just in life, the things that are worth things that we end up spending a lot of money on are arbitrary. Like, we're going to pay $6 for our latte, but we'll complain if we spend $6 on an experience that someone spent a couple $1 million on because it's only 10 minutes long or so. So we're actually really trying to, how are we going to shift audience behavior in a sense? And part of that is going to take enough content for people to feel like there's enough stuff in there beyond gaming that's kind of worth it in there for them to spend time on. And then you have enough stuff for testing out things like subscription models and creating more of that successful model outside of that longer gameplay that gaming creates. So that's something that's a hard thing to solve, because shifting audience behavior and audience expectations is a really, really hard thing. And it was interesting to see Bandersnatch on Netflix, because choose your own adventure stories have been around for a long time. And finally Netflix got to this stage where they introduced something that's been around for a long time to a mainstream audience, and the mainstream audience saw that as really innovative. But to people in that space, that's actually the Choose Your Own Adventure is kind of that simplest form of interactive storytelling. It's not easy to do right, but it's not, you know, this spatial, interactive, intuitive, mechanical, physical embodiment stuff, but it was still kind of an innovative thing for them. And so I think about that a lot in audience behavior and what audiences are used to, and having enough stuff that's comfortable and familiar, taking them to stuff that is more innovative and a little bit different. But I really truly think is that when you get to that stuff that's truly meant for VR, that's really interactive and innovative and has that magic, then you realize why VR is so special. And I think that's the thing that's going to continue keeping people in VR, because that really creates that special moment. But it takes a little bit to get audiences to understand that.
Back to patience. All right, at the buzzer, what would be advice you could give this room about, you know, the next handful of months, quarters, or years? I mean, Ted, we'll start down here at this end. What advice could you give this crowd about
Tenacity, positivity. You know,
Sound very
don't be
positive with
afraid
that.
to fail. Learn from your failure. Keep going.
Be grateful that we're all together at a time of pioneering and innovation that may not happen again for many years.
Yeah.
So be happy and proud of what you are doing, and don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to fail, as you're saying. Just keep going and keep sharing as a community.
Such a kumbaya moment. I would just say,
You started it.
oh my gosh.
started
I just think
That's
you should
so
be
cynical.
patient and really like whatever you've done in your 2D world, whatever it is, whatever tool you had, whatever your thing is, bring it to this world. And I think that's part of it. I think that we're trying to recreate what reality is, and in a 2D world, there's things that you need to do. Well, in a 3D world, it's the same things. So whatever it is that you do, try to figure out a way to do it in interactive, honestly, and just keep going. You know, fail often, fail fast, fail cheap, and move on. That's deep.
Yeah, I think because I've been in VR and Oculus for almost 4 years, but you know, in that space for longer, I felt like, oh my God, I've been in it for 30 years. It's been going on for so long. But I actually have to remind myself right now that I feel like something like Quest is just the beginning of it. Mm-hmm. And so, and I do realize a lot of companies got burned, starting production companies, getting to VR and thinking it was to monetize a lot quicker than it was. But I'm incredibly excited about where we are right now with the opportunity of starting to actually access, make VR more accessible to people, where audiences are starting to form. It is starting to become more familiar. And so taking away some of the baggage from the past and having that fresh perspective of not the we've been there, we tried it, but like, yeah, you've been there and tried it, but it wasn't ready yet. We're beginning again, and there's a lot of really exciting stuff, and people are making some really incredible experiences. So I do feel really fortunate, and there's nothing that gives me greater joy than finding a creator who's really pushing something in a unique direction and teaching us all something new. That's how we're all going to get better. So if you guys have awesome stuff, I'd love to see it.